Sure, and thanks for having me here. And hi everyone, looking forward to seeing what you're kind of adding to this conversation. So in terms of ecologies, ecosystems or constellations, I guess they're big words that we use, but actually what it comes down to is different people in different places at different levels of the system, whether that be a kind of grassroots community, whether that be a boardroom, a policymaker, and kind of everyone in between, really finding ways to come together, to work together and organize around the things that really matter. It might be based in a particular place where you have all of these different groups actually aligning behind a certain vision and doing what they each can to make it real and make it happen where they are. It might be a particular sector that is really taking a coordinated approach in each of their different ways, not as part of one necessarily, but really working like they're a kind of a flock of birds or a flock of starlings kind of coming together at key points and dispersing away at once as well. So I guess that's what we kind of mean by that. There's some kind of common characteristics, if it's useful for me to share some of those as well.
That'd be brilliant.
So some of the characteristics of ecologies that we've seen and have been working with recently are that they have a kind of big audacious vision. They're not just trying to tinker around the edges, but they're really trying to imagine a different way of doing things. And they're doing this by learning by doing and showing what is possible, not just theorizing, but actually bringing it to reality and making it visible and inviting opportunities for many people to participate in this. Often you see these groups kind of reframing or experimenting with different stories and narratives that make things relevant for people as well, rather than this kind of thing that someone else does. Often it's informed by ecological design and kind of natural systems rather than mechanistic ways of doing things. So it's really working with what emerges. Often kind of small agile teams creating big impacts, but having kind of distributed groups of people that can come in at different points of time or different parts of the cycles as well. So it's not about kind of one heavy organization doing things, but actually really bringing in the best of different skills at different points in time. And as I mentioned, kind of working across many different levels of the system as well, and different actors too. What that means in a community is actually the big themes around justice, around climate change, around economic challenges are kind of defined and made relevant locally. So inviting all of us to step into some of these big things rather than it being waiting for others to do it for us. And actually paying attention to valuing the processes of change rather than just seeking an outcome as well.
Brilliant. That's a lot.
It is a lot
of really interesting factors though. And in your experience, what are the kind of critical ways that we can support ecologies to thrive?
Sure, and there's a couple of things, and I think just speaking to there's a lot of things. It's often like ecologies are a way of working with complexity, not narrowing it down, but actually being able to work across the reality and the complexity of things that there are. In terms of what would help for them to thrive, it's really paying attention to how we organize and the governance. Often our kind of governance processes and structures want defined things, but these things are messy and there's many different parts. So how do we kind of acknowledge that and evolve these different governance approaches so we can allow many different people to kind of come into these different approaches? That goes to how you fund these things as well. It's not about projects and the projectification of things. Actually, it's about supporting these intentions over the long term and really creating the space for these different people and groups to come together in a way to actually push, the potential of these things as well. And investing in the people. Often we invest in the hard stuff, the outcomes, but actually so much this is about relationships and spaces and teams and cultures. And if you get that kind of essence of the culture working in a place or in a sector or in a thing, then actually that is your kind of core ingredient, your starter from all of which can come. The digital commons is a big enabler of kind of flourishing of this particular space as well. And how can we not all be making our own platforms, but actually finding ways to come together around that? And what are the stories that we can all tell about the journey, not just kind of the end point, not about just the successes, but some of the ups and downs along the way as well, because this is hard work. And let's not pretend that it's all easy and give this illusion of kind of heroes. Actually, there's a bit more humility that's needed.
Yeah, it doesn't happen by magic.
No way.
Brilliant. And lastly, just I'd love to hear your thoughts on why it matters right now that we think about these different approaches.
Yeah, and why it really matters, I guess. Just thinking about this decade, the 2020s, like this decade was always set to be one of a huge amount of turbulence and change. You know, COVID has just shown that in kind of full force. You know, this is where the climate reality is likely to hit more of us in kind of in the UK, feel it in very different ways. And COVID shows that there's a huge amount of unexpected things that come, that you have to adapt really quickly. You have to deal with uncertainty, with the unknown, and taking a more kind of ecosystem approach actually allows us to be adaptable and resilient amongst this, shifting away from the kind of mechanistic way of approaching things, and not pretending that we can control things and we can know things, but actually working with the natural forces of life and designing the way we organize and come together around that, rather than in utter opposition to that. So yeah, it's something about how we channel the natural forces of change into how we work and make that real, rather than kind of fighting against it or imposing a different way on that, because that's just never going to work. And I think, yeah, COVID really showed us that.
Yes, indeed. And we've talked a lot about adaptive capacity and those kinds of things. And do you think there is something about the way that ecologies can work that creates an ability to adapt and thrive in uncertainty in different ways?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a great article by Jeremy Lent that's been shared recently, and he shares these 6 rules for humans rejoining the natural world. And you know, that is about diversity, and that the system's health really depends on the kind of integration and being able to embrace difference and recognizing that these things can all come into their own at once. He talks about balance and how you need balance, and you need a variety of different views and perspectives to kind of come in if we create healthy societies in a way that we haven't right now. And just that's the cycle of life. We can't always be on all of the time. No one organization can perform at top kind of speed always. So actually, how do we get better at kind of taking a relay, or recognizing when some groups or teams might need kind of rest and balance and recuperation, and others might take the lead, but recognize that's kind of a part of a cycle. So trying us all kind of recognizing we're not superhumans, but we're part of this interconnected web of life, and kind of really acting from that place.
I love that image. I know we could talk about this all day, but it's a great framing to start off the discussion. So thank you so much for sharing, and hopefully we'll be able to dig into these ideas even more.
Cool, a pleasure.